أبدا أبدا مش مستني حد من الدنيا يطمن يوم أسند على غيرك هيكون سندي كل عليك أبدا أبدا عيني بحضن الحب بدأت توبة في غفران راجع لك مسيحية فيها أتعلم أبدا أبدا مش متساب دينا الدنيا سؤال بيقول can we say that Jesus had two wills in Gethsemane? No. Simply according to the teachings of the forefathers, they said that he had only one nature out of two and one will out of two. Total unity.
Unity between the humanity and the divinity, the will of God and the will of man. We can't say that Christ had two wills because that would confirm the notion that he had two natures that were separated and at odds with each other, as if he's partial human and partial divine. From the moment of incarnation, he was always God and always man. In Gethsemane, the struggle that he was undergoing about not my will but your will, he was teaching us how, as a human, when entering a period of deep suffering, to sacrifice my own will, understanding that human will does not want to suffer, and to put that will in the hands of God and allow him to drive the ship. As he was fully human, he was feeling the human emotion, feeling betrayal, pressure, the pain of the cross that was coming. All of that pain, he brought it into prayer, showing us that when we're suffering, to bring that pain into prayer. But he himself said that I came for this hour. So he came for the cross. It's not as if he was rejecting the cross and the Father was pushing him to do it. He's coming with his full will, but as a human nature, no one is joyful with pain. It's not a natural thing to desire. So he confirms to us that he is fully human, entering into a period of suffering and injustice and pain and ridicule, and expressing his emotions in that period. But let's not say that he had two wills at this time. That would be incorrect. One will after he was incarnate and the humanity and divinity came together. Because we say that humanity parted not from his divinity for a single moment nor a twinkling of an eye. One nature out of two. That's how we understand it. Another question. I'm the eldest of my siblings. And my mom says, I don't remember if I baptized you or not. Don't worry, after all these years, you took communion and prayed and you love God. Don't worry. You're baptized, don't worry. Sometimes the elderly get worried and they think maybe I didn't baptize him. This is just a worry. Another question. Did God create aliens? As if we need more creatures to worry about. The people we have are plenty. The Bible doesn't speak about aliens or other planets. The Bible doesn't say. And if the Bible doesn't talk about it, let's not occupy our minds with it. One time St. Paul said that no other creation can separate us from the love of God. We know that there's angels and demons. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. When we start to think about other planets with other forms of life, it's not really understood at this time, and it's not expected at this time because there are so many different criteria that had to be met in order for life to exist on earth. And it makes us appreciate how precise God was when creating. It took many factors to be fine-tuned in order for life to exist on earth. And we now have 200 factors that had to be fine-tuned in order for life to exist on earth. And all of that was done so that humans could be on earth. Whether there are other stars and suns and planets that have life, it doesn't seem that so far, the information we have, it doesn't seem that they have the factors necessary. In spite of that, that's not really our topic of conversation. But at the end of the day, nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. Another question, what does it mean that Christ became sin for us? This means that Christ carried all the sins of humanity as if he himself became sin, meaning the curse was descended on him. Take it as the understanding of curse rather than sin. He took the curse on his head. The crown of thorns was the result of curse because thorns came to the earth after Adam's sin. And Christ took those thorns, the symbol of curse, on his head in the crown of thorns. So he was telling us that he's coming to remove that curse from us and removing it from us. Another question. I know that people who predict the future are evil, but I found that someone in the media was making a lot of accurate predictions. Don't follow these things. The devils know more than us, but their knowledge is not complete. It's still limited. The devil is like the angel in his nature, meaning he can know things that are beyond our understanding. For example, imagine that the world of devils is a world. It knows what you did today and sees with your circumstances, but he doesn't know what will happen tomorrow. But he sees someone at work who's annoyed at you and is preparing something for you. So if someone who predicts the future says to you, by the way, in the next week something big will happen to you at work, then you say, wow, how do they know? They predicted it exactly. Yes, because he sees the other person who's cooking a circumstance for you. And so he made a calculated decision and calculated prediction saying that if this person is doing this now, then I bet over the next week, then something bad will happen to you. He can gather trends. He's smarter than humans in that he can understand where trends are going, and based on his experience, he can predict what things will happen. That doesn't mean he has foreknowledge. The only one who knows time and ahead of time is the Lord himself. But we can be fooled easily. One time someone told me that she made a big sin. There was someone who was doing some sort of magic and predicting outcomes. So I went to her and she told me that a groom will come to you, but he won't complete the issue. And so it turns out this girl had had 6 different people come to her and nothing's worked out. So it didn't take much art to predict what would happen, because this has happened as a trend with her 6 times before. And then when I asked her a little bit more, she told me that she told her exactly what had happened before with the 5 other previous people, so she just used intuition to predict that it would happen again. But she didn't really bring anything from the unknown or make any future predictions that were real. Just avoid these things, because these things can make people lose their path. We have the Lord, He's with us today, tomorrow, and always. So why do we worry about tomorrow? Why do we ask about what's going to happen tomorrow? You don't need to know exactly what's going to happen. Another question? If I don't share a secret with my spouse, is that okay? If it's something about you personally, then that's a problem. But if a personal friend tells you a secret and asks you not to share it with someone, then that's a different story. It's like the father of confession. Can he share the sins of others with his wife? Of course not. So sometimes people's secrets we can avoid telling our spouses. The secrets of people are not ours. They're not our own. They don't involve us. But our personal secrets have to be shared with our spouse. The husband and wife have to share those things openly and not hide those things from each other. But someone else's secret it's allowed for you to not share it, especially if it doesn't correlate or coincide or affect your spouse. Dr. Hani will present research for us about something that's been on my mind that I need to hear, and then I'll continue after him with an important point. The idea came to me thinking about that we're all aging, and we have a younger generation and a second and third generation, and some of you may even have great-grandkids. So I wanted to ask myself and to do some research. What's going to happen to us, and what are we going to look like in 40 to 50 years? Will the churches be full? Will there be conventions like this one? Most likely, the majority of us in 40 or 50 years will be gone. Most likely. So the question that we need to ask, what can we do to ensure that the church, the Orthodox Church, and our Coptic faith continues outside of Egypt? I want to show you guys some research. There's a Gallup poll that tells us on March 28th of 2024, saying that church attendance has declined in most U.S. religious groups. It says that only 3 in 10 U.S. adults attend church services. And on the Guardian website, it says, losing the religion, why U.S. churches are on the decline. If you see the ratio here on this table of the number of churches that have opened versus closed, and the ratio from 2014 to 2019 has flipped, where we have more churches closing rather than opening. In 2014, there were 4,500 churches that were open and 3,700 closed. So it was net positive. But in 2019, it was the complete opposite, with 3,000 opening and 4,500 closing, with a net negative of 1,500 churches. A third research showed us that median church attendance 2020 versus 2000,
بحضورهم سنة 2000 يعني
with a
the
very
median
steady
attendance
decline
in 2020
over the
versus
last 20
2000.
years.
وزي ما انتم شايفين في الكيرف نزل بينزل تقريبا 10% كل
The curve goes down about 10% every 3 to 4 years.
عملوا إحصائية إن
They
قالوا
did a little bit more of a
أكتر
detailed
الناس اللي
substratified
استفادوا
trend
من
where they saw that
45%
Catholics had the largest drops in attendance from 45 to 33%.
الأرثوذكسية
Orthodoxy went down by 9%.
لحظة لما يقولوا أرثوذكس
When they say Orthodox, they say Eastern and Oriental, including the Greeks, the Russians, etc.
الهندوس بيقلوا
The Hindus dropped by 8%.
الناس اللي ما عندهمش دين الايثيست
People who are atheists from 18 to 29-year-old, 35% say they have no religious preference. Muslims who attend regularly are up 4% from 34 to 38%. Jewish Americans, they went up from 15% 2 decades ago to 19% this last decade and currently at 22%. So if we look at the Coptic Orthodox churches and the Oriental Orthodox churches in 2010 and then 10 years later, the Oriental Orthodox Church went up from 27% to 42%.
كنا 27% بس انكريز دلوقتي 42% انكريز وبقيه الارثوذكس
The rest of the Orthodox churches went from 73% to 58%. So we are increasing a lot more than the Eastern churches.
الكنائس الارثوذكسيه
The Orthodox churches as well, the number of parishes, the Oriental Orthodox churches were 623 to almost 900 churches. The Eastern Orthodox churches went down by a little bit. If they look at adherence to the churches and stratified the Oriental Orthodox churches, they see that the Coptic Orthodox Church is the most adherent compared to the other churches. So if we see on this curve, there's 180,000 Coptic people attending churches, and then Ethiopians afterwards in the 90,000s, and so on and so forth. When they look at the Eastern Orthodox churches, the Greeks are by far the most. But if you look at a more detailed view, they saw that there was a 17% decrease in Eastern Orthodox Church attendance. So while the numbers are still high, there is still a percentage drop. Alternatively, the Oriental Orthodox attending has gone up by 62%. All this research is outside of Egypt. We're speaking about the US only. When they looked at church adherence, meaning how adherent are people to attending churches, they saw that the Coptic Church had the highest adherence. They went up from 31.2% to 34.3% from 2010 to 2020. The Armenians after us, and then the Ethiopians, but we had the most adherence compared to those churches. In terms of numbers, where are the Copts outside of Egypt? The highest number is in Saudi Arabia, actually, with 1 million Copts, followed by the UAE, and then Kuwait, and then the US, with 200,000 people in the US. This is likely old data that needs to be updated, but in terms of the US counties with the highest percent of the population, the highest one is Tennessee, and right after it is New Jersey, and then Richmond County in New York, and then back to Tennessee again, and then New Jersey, and then New Jersey, New Jersey, and then Orange County, California.
وهكذا. حبيت أقول يمكن السبب
I wanted to say that maybe the reason the adherence is increasing is because of immigration. And it's true that immigration has gone up significantly from North Africa to the US.
خايف لا تفتكروا إن إحنا
So I don't want you to think that the presence of people in the church is natural. It's only happening because there are more people coming to the US. The country with the most people coming from North Africa is Egypt to the US.
كل مصريين كل مهاجرين عنه 20% فطبعا ده بيساعد في الاحصائيات اللي قلتها. اعلى اماكن
The top areas of residence of Egyptians in the US is New York and New Jersey. This is all religions, not just Christians. And then Detroit, Michigan, Los Angeles next,
واشنطن
and then Washington State, and so on.
سؤال بقى اللي احنا
So going back to our initial question,
ليه بيترك
why do people leave the church? And why is there a drop in attendance? In spite of the fact that our numbers are pretty decent, but if we put a correction factor for the fact that more of us are immigrating, the question still remains, are we truly adherent or are our numbers being compensated?
فاحنا عملنا سيرفي
So we did a survey about 5 or 6 years ago, and I wanted to give you some of the data from it.
لما السيرفي اللي عملوه مش بتاعنا سوري ده مش بتاعنا احنا السيرفي عملوه على مستوى الكنائس
So going back to the Gallup survey they initially did, and they saw that the majority of the youth who leave the church, 27% because they wanted a break from the church, 25% moved to college, 23% couldn't make it because of work. Another 26% said it's because it's judgmental or hypocritical. 20% didn't feel connected to the people at church, and 15% felt that people at church were unfriendly and unwelcoming. Again, this is not just specific to cops, this was a Gallup poll for people who were everywhere. But what I'll show you is that there's similarities in the reasons for why the youth in our church and in other churches leave the church.
جزء منها طبعا انا بعدت ورحت سافرت ورحت كليه بعيده عن المنطقه بتاعت الكنيسه فما بروحش كنيستي لكن لما تدخل بقى وتسالهم بجد انا شايف ان الكنيسه فيها رياء انا شايف انه الكنيسه ما بتردش على الاسئله بتاعتي انا شايف ان
When you get a little deeper with people and ask them why they're not coming, a lot of it ends up being the unwelcoming portion or the hypocritical portion, or they felt unwelcome ultimately.
فسمينا ده silent
So we call this the silent exodus, youth leaving the church.
نفسي تقروه عشان
There's a book that I'd like for you to read regarding your kids. The book is called You Lost Me.
واحد كتب عن
This is about a person who wrote about his own experiences. He's not Egyptian.
قد ايه مش هو بس الوحيد
About how he and others,
آلاف مؤلفة يوصل
thousands and thousands, were lost.
يقول إن في آلاف
His Grace Bishop Yusuf was saying that there are thousands that we don't know who are lost from the church.
أسباب.
And he lists 7 reasons.
أول واحدة عدم القدرة على
The first one being the inability to live 2 cultures at the same time.
شوية عايز نتمرس وشوية عايز
Feeling Egyptian and feeling American at the same time.
إن مجموعة كبيرة
A second reason
حواليه
is the presence of an overwhelming majority of newcomers from Egypt who have needs, who make the church busy in giving them their needs. Need an apartment, need a lawyer, need asylum. My wife is fighting with me. So these people needs override the ability of the church to provide help, and so they feel like they're uncared for.
مغطية عن احتياجات الشباب فالشباب قال لك
So the youth are leaving because they feel like they should leave silently and not cause issues. And by the way, when our youth leave, they leave very silently and behaved. They don't say, this is my church. They don't say, you guys are leaving. But you'll notice that us as the adults are the ones who fight. Why do you speak English? Why do you favor the youth? This is our church. And we keep talking about our rights, but when our kids leave, they're nice, silent, and gentle, and then one day we don't see them anymore. And when you ask them, they say, "You were too busy for us. All your needs were being satisfied, but for us, you weren't looking for our needs." The third reason is sometimes they feel like they're being judged wrongly because of their American culture and upbringing, meaning the youth who come with long hair, for example, everybody in church starts making comments or giving them looks, even if it's someone who doesn't have authority to speak to that person. So they say, "Well, you know what? Let me just leave." So as soon as they go to college, they don't come back. The fourth reason is that the clergy and the servants are overwhelmed with serving the newcomers from Egypt. The fifth one, the clergy and the servants cannot adapt themselves to Western culture. The sixth one, the clergy and servants do not effectively communicate in English. And the seventh reason, the lack of curricula and lectures that are appropriate and relevant to their culture.
طبعا كلكم وسمعتوا امبارح مش فاكر امبارح ولا النهارده انه امريكا اصبحت اقل تدينا.
Put on top of that the fact that the US is decreasing in its religiosity outside of marriage, sex, changing gender, drugs everywhere, legality of marijuana. So there is a lot of external challenges for the youth. So we wanted to have a survey. We asked 13 questions to clergy, youth leaders, and youth in the Northeast. We got 700 responses, and I wanted to show you the results. The majority came from New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Florida, and Canada. The first question: it is common for youth to lose interest in church by a certain age. In your best estimation, how much youth do you think you lose by college? 67% of respondents agree that 30 to 50% are lost by college age. So if I ask some of the servants here, they would say 30 to 50%. Next question, please arrange in order of importance the possible reasons why people are not accepting missionary ideas. And they said, number one, the church should take care of its own children first before going to outsiders. And at the end, we don't get the people inside or outside. The second reason, we are uncomfortable of the use of the native language. And number three, we're afraid for our children blending with non-Copts. And so we like to keep them isolated. So we don't bring people inside and our own kids leave us. Another question, please arrange in order of importance the reasons for which youth leave the Coptic Church. 401 answers came. Number one, being they feel being judged by the church elders as Americanized. These are the youth saying this. What are you wearing? What are you doing to yourself? Why don't you fix your hair? Why don't you do this or that? And unfortunately, this is not the priest saying these things. It's the random uncles and aunts. Number two, the length of the prayers. And number three, the church does not speak about contemporary youth-related issues. We speak about things that are not relevant. Another question, in your opinion, what is or are in the Coptic culture that may be modified to attract Westerners without losing orthodoxy? Number one was to choose clergy from within Western land who are ready to embrace non-Copts. 70% of people answered this. The second thing was the exclusive use of native language. So the last thing I want to ask us, in 50 years, what will our church look like? If your children are now grandparents, don't think about yourself. When your kids themselves become grandparents, You probably won't be here. What will happen to the church? As we said before, the majority of us at that time will be gone. If you imagine your child as a grandparent, what and where are your third and fourth generations? This question is crucial in the church and all its levels. If it does not discuss it now, we will regret it significantly in the future, because the world around us is inviting the silent exodus. So if we don't struggle and fight to answer this question, our youth will be gone and the church may become weak. We think our church will be the most important that the West will look to in the future. Come look at Apocalypse Night any night here in Coptic Church. It's a beautiful thing to witness. You see 200 kids, yes, sleeping, but attending church. Find me a single church worldwide in which kids spend all night in the middle of their exams sometimes present. And that's why I see our church is the hope of Christianity in the West and the world. But the problem is, what is our role to maintain the church that it continues its role 40 or 50 years down the line?
Thank you على البرزنتيشن
I want to hear your thoughts. I'm not surprised by what was said, because we hear it often in discussions when I sit with the youth and they tell me, I used to be a deacon, but now I don't go to church 7 or 8 years. I got married outside the church and I became an atheist. And of course, we hear a lot of mothers who say that part of their kids have left the church. All those people, when they get married and have kids who grow up, all of those, that whole generation will be outside the church. Let's be practical. So these numbers that we're seeing are shocking. We have a problem in front of us. We're happy that the churches are filled now, but if each congregation filled all of its churches, we would need 7 times more the number of churches in the world. If every Coptic person showed up to church, then we would need up to 7 times the number of churches. To all the people who come to Christmas Eve and Easter Eve, are this the whole congregation? No, this is about 50% of the people who come to church. This means we have a very high loss level, and the most area in which we lose people is from 16 years old to 40 years old. And many of those who are lost never come back, unfortunately. A percentage do come back miraculously. After they turn the age of 35 to 40, then they start to feel tenderness back to church. But a percentage doesn't come back. So Hani is asking, what do we do to guarantee that after our age the church is stronger than how we left it? And it'll be bringing people from outside, not pushing its own people out. Because the book of Acts says the Lord was adding daily to the church. Thus, adding is the natural function of the church. It doesn't lose its own, and it brings people from outside. Our Lord said, he who does not gather with me scatters. I want some ideas and advice from the audience about what we can do for the sake of the third generation. We're thinking 40 to 50 years down the line. One idea from the crowd
أول كومنت نعمل برامج
is to
أهداف
have
قدام
programs
advanced
for
powerful
pre-servants that are
عشان
stronger
خاطر تخاطب
and more
الجيل
advanced about
اللي
how
يدخل بشكل
to
أفضل.
speak to our generation in a more positive way that goes with their language.
تدرسينه مش للداء
What
مش
other
للمرض
ideas do you
للي
have?
ينقذ الأجيال. اتفضل. Thank you. يبقى احنا عاوزين new
The
leaders
second idea is that we need new
more
leaders
qualified
who are more
عشان
qualified
المهمة بقت أصعب مع
because the
الجيل
current
مع
mission is more challenging.
مع الشباب. يبقى هي بتتكلم عن تركيز إن
So
احنا
we want to
نطلع new
focus on
leaders.
fostering new leaders.
Thank you.
The third idea is to fix ourselves first and to apply the words of the Bible on ourselves rather than speaking about things.
اوكي خلينا احنا الكبار نصلح نفسنا. دي قاعدة حلوة مظبوطة لأن هم بيسيبوا الكنيسة بسببنا.
A lot of times the youth are leaving the church because of us. So let's make sure
مهما كان
that we're treating
لازم نصلح
these kids
نفسنا
well and fixing ourselves
عايشين سلوك
and
مسيحي
living
كويس.
a godly Christian life,
في
not
الكنيسة
fighting amongst each other in church and outside of church, and money occupying our minds and so on.
واحد. برافو عليك.
Another idea
احنا
is
accommodate
to accommodate the young people, to take roles of leadership
ليهم بوست واضح كده
and having clear roles inside the church while we stand behind them in the background to support them.
يبقى خمسينات ممكن
The person in charge of serving doesn't have to be in his 50s, it could be someone in the 20s or 30s.
تسوون رحمة.
طيب برضه احنا في حاجتين لازم نعملهم بالنسبه لنا كليدرز يعني is kind of education to the parents and the grandparents about the importance of the language معلش هم يضحوا على
We need to educate parents and grandparents about the importance of language, and we need to tell them that those days, the days that the kids are there, should be English liturgies. And there can be days for people who are elder or people who just came from Egypt. We can have a parallel liturgy in Arabic. That way nobody feels left out. But it can't be at the expense of the people who are here.
كويس يعني يبقى الأولوية
The priority has to be for our youth and not for us. Sunday should be prayed majority English for their sake, not for those who have just come from Egypt. Those who have just come from Egypt have other opportunities.
بيضيع فعليا
But those who get lost are the second and third generation, and thus they get priority.
Spend so much effort focusing on Egyptian culture and many times unrelated to the Bible. We should focus on biblical principles.
Thank you. إن احنا to focus على البايبل
To focus on the Bible itself and its teachings rather than little t traditions that are focused and grounded in being Egyptian. We don't preach Egyptian traditions or culture. We
كمان اتفضلي بس قولي بصوت عالي يعني.
مش لازم نبقى traditional. الخدمة بتاعت الشباب بالذات لازم تبقى outside the box. We have to go with them like صراحات كان تامر نفسه بيقول لي اطلعي بيهم outside after الliturgy ويقعدوا بيهم في حتة ما تبقاش traditional.
يعني think out of
we have to think outside the box when it comes to our youth. Our activities and the way we deliver the message to them should be in a new, unique way,
القديمة لأن هم lectures
because lectures and classes are no longer acceptable.
advices للتطوير. ففي رأيكم احنا بنتكلم يعني مش هناخد مفيش بإيدينا قرارات بنسمع بعض.
Another answer from the audience, that the hope of the church is to move in the direction of evangelism. That way, the church has an American congregant who live the same life and pray the same liturgy. That's what will guarantee that our kids continue. That way, the church is not just Egyptians, it has to have believers, Americans like, who believe in the Orthodox faith. And those are present in a small percentage, but we need to increase those percentages, and that will allow true stability in our churches. The other thing that was mentioned was to solve the conflicts that bother our youth. Simple example like Christmas being the 25th of December versus January 7th. Another idea was suggested that all our kids from a young age should be encouraged to speak about their Christ and their church and not be afraid and isolated. We should be encouraged to speak. The church has always been evangelical and in its core. Another idea was shared that our eyes should be on our kids, that as soon as I start to see them starting to drift, I shouldn't wait a couple of years. I should catch them early in the initial steps. As soon as they start on the path of the silent exodus, we should do and drop everything in order to bring them back.
So that we give them a voice, and nothing is shameful or nothing is difficult.
حلو قوي.
Another idea was shared that they should be allowed to express what they want, to make suggestions, and we should respect their opinions, because that will increase their affinity to the church, to feel like the church is truly their home. And two opinions were shared here. The first one was, how do we focus on ordaining young kids deacons to teach them hymns, because it allows them to have a sense of belonging from a younger age. And keep in mind that still a percentage of deacons are lost, especially at the time of colleges. But of course, it's helpful to have them ordained. The second is, we need to fight against the idea that the church is being presented in a cultural way. The church is not presented with Egyptian jokes or fool and tameh. That's not our church. The church is not correlated with that. The person who comes new to the church can have a sense of culture shock because of that, because that's not what Orthodox Christianity is. That's the culture of Egypt, and the person does not want to be Egyptian, and he is allowed to say that. Another idea is to have smaller parishes rather than large parishes, because the smaller the parishes, the more focused you can be on the congregants. That way, each priest can know about each individual. But in larger churches, people can get lost and they may not feel a sense of belonging.
في جاب بين الخدام اللي بيجوا من مصر والخدام اللي بيخدموا من هنا، فمش بنعرف في يعني كونفليكت بين كل الخدام. لو احنا نلاقي طرق موتيفيتد ان احنا نشجع الخدام اللي جايين هنا يخدموا ولادنا، نساعدهم على ده، لان هم مور ستيبل عن الشباب اللي موجودين اللي بيشتغلوا واللي بيروحوا الجامعه اللي مش قادرين ينجزوا، فاحنا مش لاقيين حد للخدمه بسبب الكونفليكت اللي موجود.
Something else was mentioned is that we have a problem with the youth who are coming from Egypt and they're serving with an Egyptian mentality, and that can be problematic. And alternatively, the youth who are from here may not have the maturity, or their circumstances may not allow the time for him to serve. So in both categories, there are lacks and issues. I'm happy with this participation. Let's keep hearing ideas. Something else was mentioned, that we don't have priests or servants who can answer the questions of atheism, the questions that come across the youth. It's better not to generalize, but I agree with you that there's more education needed in apologetics. There are a few who are experts in this field, but there are plenty of priests and servants who are very good in this. But we agree that all the priests and all the youth servants should study apologetics and are strong in it. That way, if my son or daughter doesn't have the question, has a question and I can't answer it, then it's on me.
Any activity or any tool is important, but the most important, we have to focus on relationship with God. If we have a good relationship with God, it will be more important than doing any kind of activity and changing of method how to deal with
Suggestion here being made that we should focus more on presenting who God is and our theology rather than focusing on the different approaches in our service. We want everything to be done in a spiritual manner rather than just the outside image, because no matter how nice the image is, the image in and of itself won't be attractive.
ككنيسة قبطية احنا دايما بنتكلم عن تلمذة، بس في الحقيقة مفيش تلمذة.
We always say in the Coptic Church that we should have discipleship, but we feel like we don't have discipleship now. We want to focus on discipling people and teaching and one-on-one focusing and mentoring to guide someone to grow in spirit. That's the role of the Father Confession in a sense, but there are other mentors and servants who can play that role. I want to speak about a problem that may not be obvious for us as the New Age practice. It's like poison in the honey. It's like saying things like spiritual cooking and yoga. These attract a lot of people who don't necessarily realize that it takes them in the wrong direction. One of the most common tricks that's known from a while ago is love and acceptance. And we need to focus on that. We need to accept the youth with all the way they come in, and everybody's different in their attributes and stuff, and that can be problematic. So acceptance and tolerance is not a stamp that we can put. We need to accept and tolerate our youth, but we need to have limits.
فرصتك طبعا لازم الحقيقة معاها حق إن في أزمة كبيرة
Something was mentioned that there is an issue with the father figures.
مش مركزة مع
A lot of men are not focused on God, and the mother is the one who's honed in and focused. So when the son sees that his father's not going to church, he also feels like he doesn't necessarily have to.
بدري يبعد بحجة
So he starts to drift away because the father's not going to church.
أكيد إن إحنا لازم ما نطلعش حد يعلم وشباب
Another thing that came up
أزمة في اللغة.
is that we shouldn't have someone teaching if they can't speak English properly. Because after 5 minutes, the kids are going to zone out, so it's not fair to the kids.
We should respect the
Another thing that came up is that we should respect social media because that's the youth's world.
وبالتالي لازم نناقشهم
And so we need to discuss with them and hear them on social media and use them in a way to use social media for their benefit rather than their detriment.
اسمحوا لي يكون آخر رأي. أنا عارف الآراء كلها حلوة بجد الكلام إيجابي جدا لكن عشان نوصل لحاجة. ها؟
انا عندي مشكله قابلتها مع ابني في مدرسه احد. اسالها هو مشكله انا اتربيت في مصر في كنيستي متعودين واحنا صغيرين قد كده عندنا مدرس نازل احد بيرنم مع
I grew up in a church in Egypt and we used to sing a lot of hymns in Sunday school. And so that was the type of growth I had. And the Agbeya I was taught when I was young. And I knew the Tasbaha, all these things before I immigrated. The problem I face here is that when my son here, they don't sing songs in Sunday school. They don't pray the Agbeya with them. And I try to go pray with my son, and he feels like it's something new for him. When I try to sing a song with him, he feels like it's new for him. I said this to Abuna before, but to them it's not as important of a priority.
مفيش ولا ترنيم ولا ادويه ولا الحاجات دي كلها. وانا فعلا حاجه بتضايقني ان ابني مش بيعرف يعمل كده.
طب هاني هيقول حاجة وأنا يعني عامل دراسة بسيطة في النوع
I'm going to let Hani speaks, and then I'm going to say a quick study, and then we'll conclude. I want to say to you that out of the 22 things that we gathered, there was only one thing of the 22 that's about us. 21 points, we are complaining about the church and service and servants. And what I was trying to say, and what I was hoping we would reach, we didn't reach. Meaning, what is your role to preserve the next 50 years? Not a single practical thing was taken, except for the person who said that we have to be good. Who said we have to be good mothers or good fathers? Who said that my issues with my spouse is more important? None of these things were said. That's why we are so good at pointing out the flaws in church or the servants or service. And I'm not saying we have to say he's right.
بيقولوا مرة صحفي
One time a journalist was speaking to Mother Teresa and asked her, what is the problem with the Catholic Church? And she said, me and you.
فاهمين معنى؟
You understand the meaning?
هو عاوز هي طبعا شخصية مهمة
She was a great personality, of course, and he wanted to ask her, what are the problems in the church?
المشكلة
And she said, "It's me
وانت
and you."
يعني رأي هاني في رأيي
It's like what Hanny is saying,
يا جماعة اللي في ايدينا
that what's in our hands, let's do it.
ايدينا نجيب كهنة
It's not in our hands to get
قويين جدا
priests who are very smart and very educated and perfect English and apologetics. Yes, we're going to try. But what's your role with your kids at home?
في دور ما بيتعملش
There's a role that's not being done. The father's absence.
أساسية في التلمذة الأم مركزة
The mother is focused on cooking.
كده عاوز أكلمكم
That's why I want to speak with you about something called testing the Christian parent, or tests of the Christian parenting.
يعني احنا بنطلع العيال ازاي
How do we raise our kids?
خوفكم شوية معايا
And I'm going to scare you a little bit in this talk,
بصراحة احنا بناخد العيال
because we take our kids
كل واحد شايل ابنه أو بنته
as dough,
ممكن يبقى قديس
and the way we raise them, we can make them saints because they're malleable when we take them. But at the end, when they came up as atheists or addicts or walked down the wrong path,
ممكن ما يكونش له دور في القصة
of course,
انك تقول
you can say that you had no role to play or that you are not to blame. There are things you could have done differently.
ما تعملش وعشان كده طلع
That's why your child ended up like this. But as Doe that came to you, he came to you as a saint from baptism, but you didn't continue on that path. So let me read this passage for you. This is from 1 Corinthians, and it's a little scary. It says, "According to the grace of God which was given to me, as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another builds on it. Any building has a foundation, meaning Christ and our faith, and that we won't differ with. Next, but let each one take heed how he builds on it." So that's the quality of work that you put on the foundation, the quality of service, the quality of parenting. It makes a big difference from one person to another. We all have kids, and God gave us this ability. But these kids, how will they be raised? They won't all be raised the same. For no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Christ Jesus. So the foundation is not to be differed with. Now, if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, 6 different materials that you can use to build. I'm going to apply these 6 different materials on the 6 ways of parenting. And this can be applied to service and work. There's work that's gold, there's work that's ash, and everything in between. Each one's work will become clear, for the day will declare it. So, however you raise your kids will become evident after 20 years. The product of your effort will be clear. Don't say that I didn't play a role or I couldn't have done better. Of course you could have. There was plenty in your hands and in your effort. For the day will declare it, because it will be revealed if anyone's by fire, and the fire will test each one's work. We have a thought in Egypt that the rich Copts allow their kids to go outside of Egypt to study from high school and university. So a girl leaves the country at 16 to learn in a country by herself. She's not strong in the church and not well established and without her parents. What do you think is going to happen? I saw so many of those youth. When I saw them after 4 or 5 years, they were completely confused. Because mom and dad wanted to take pride in the fact that I sent my child to Harvard or I sent my child to Oxford. Okay, congratulations, you spent millions, but then what? Your child is now an atheist. Because at the stage of crucial age, you left them alone and you weren't even establishing them well enough. Back to the passage. And the fire will test each one's work of what sort it is. Work which he has built on it endures, he will receive a reward. So each of us will be tested, each of our children will be tested. in the fire. If gold, they'll be gold. If fire, if wood or hay or straw, it'll be all consumed. There are youth in front of us who are taken with whatever ideas are going. They can't stand the waves and the pressures that are surrounding them because they were made of straw. But there are other youth who are gold, who came from a home that was strong. So don't say that we don't have a role to play, or don't wait for the church to do the role that you weren't willing to do. The passage concludes, if anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. There are some practical tests I see every day. A 15-year-old who is exposed to pornography. It happens in all the schools. That child who is raised well will close his eyes and say, I don't want this garbage, no matter how much pressure they face. 7 out of 10 youth are watching pornography because the quality of the way they were raised was wood or straw. Another situation, a 12-year-old girl is exposed to temptation and emotional attraction and she follows this boy's words because she's hungry for love. There's no father who's giving her love and attention, or her mother is not paying attention to her, and she doesn't know about the purity of her body, and she doesn't understand any of these things, so she follows like all the other girls. Another young youth who are introduced to drugs, and so many are walking in that path now, boys and girls, because this is just a trend that's happening. But the person who is raised gold knows that his son or daughter won't go down this road. Another situation that requires lying to get out of trouble. If your son is like Daniel or Joseph, won't lie to get out of trouble. But your son lies easily because you didn't raise them properly. You need to realize that you didn't put them in church enough. So when they're put and quartered in a situation, they'll lie. I have a child who came to me in elementary school who told me, my mom said, why didn't you cheat on the exam? If the whole class is cheating, why didn't you cheat as well? So he came to ask me, am I right or is my mom right? What do I say to that kid? Traveling away from family at a young age results in many compromises, and we find them later on. Don't think that your kids are angels or that the world is peaceful. This is all silliness. We know what happens in the world around us. We understand that evil exists all around us. So how can you allow your kids to have these journeys? How many of us explain the faith and dogma to our kids? Today, someone was saying that apologetics is weak in our church. Another thing is the passage from Ephesians that we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried away with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men and the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. One of the priests in Alexandria is telling me, ask me for videos that are being sent to middle schoolers from other churches that are trying to make them doubt the basics. Who says that Christ is God? Does God go to the bathroom like us? Can God cry like us? Do you believe these things? So these waves are traveling in Egypt to make the kids doubt. How many of us taught our kids the answers to these things? Because if he doesn't find an answer early, then he'll leave us tomorrow. With any push, he'll leave the church. In Jude, he says, "But you, beloved, building yourselves up on your most holy faith, praying in the Holy Spirit." The second thing is the field of Christian values. We have to teach them the values and how to behave in a proper manner no matter what situation they're put in. So dogma is one path and values is another path. Because what made Joseph say no to Potiphar's wife at a time when there was so much pressure on him and there's no one around him to say that he's not wrong? but he made a decision that he would not wrong or not do wrong in front of God's eyes because he was raised properly. His older brother Judah, while he was with his father, fell into adultery. Because Judah wasn't raised like Joseph. Joseph took a different type of raising. In Philemon it says that you may become blameless and harmless children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation among whom you shine as lights in the world. Our kids have to be different, full of light. When the world goes crazy, they are walking straight and illuminated. The field of wisdom and choices. Did you teach your kids how to make the right decision, to choose between right and wrong? We have a problem about Gen Z, who are the new generations from 14 to 25. They have an issue with critical thinking, meaning anything that comes in front of them on social media, they're quick to believe. That's why they're so easy to fool. No one taught them how to critically think and to question things and to ask, who said that this was real? Or who said this is the truth? No one taught them to think. You want your kid to ask questions and to doubt in church, that way you can answer the questions. But outside, I want them to doubt things that come across their way. When someone says that science has proven there's no God, they should doubt these things. They should question them. They should have critical thinking that makes them say, hold up, I don't believe in this. This is not real. Did we teach our kids how to choose friends? Did we teach them how to choose their careers? You know, there are certain careers that are crazy, like being a YouTuber. And these career paths have an element of evil for them. Increase in violence, increase in sex. And those who pay the price are our youth who grow up, who don't have a good foundation that allows them to say no. You teach them how to read, how to choose good from bad on social media and their interests. Like the Bible said, test all things, hold fast to what is good, abstain from every form of evil. Why do you take things at face value from outside? Test what they're saying. Who says that they're right in what they say? Who says that everything that is new is right? Who says that the science is right? The Bible says there is knowledge that is a lie, that is fake. We get that from the Bible itself. In order to succeed in raising your kids, you need to implant a good faith. I want to show you a graph that's on the screen that I thought of. On the left, you see roots, and on the right, you see fruits. What you implant in them today, you'll see down the line. And the more the roots are strong, the better the fruits will be. The roots have three things you should focus on. The first one being the Orthodox faith and dogma. The second being behaviors that we don't mess with. We don't lie, we don't cheat. The sons of God have different behaviors. And the third being that I influence others. I am not the one who is influenced. I am the evangelist. I have the truth on my side. I'm not the one who's going to follow the outside influence. So put these three things as the foundation of the roots. After 20 years, your kids will be strong leaders. They'll have personal success. They'll be wise with straight thoughts. And they'll be able to have sustainability and expansion and have much good down the line. And will raise his or her kids down the line. Because you want to know how will your kids' kids be. You want each generation to be better than the one before it. Because the more rooted they are, the better they will be as parents. Think and ask yourself, what did I do when raising my kids to allow them to be good parents and parents of saints. This, our Bible teaches us all these things. When St. Paul is speaking to Timothy, that the faith started with his grandmother, and then his mother, and then Timothy. Timothy was better than all three. The faith traveled from grandmother to mother to son. We should be progressing and moving forward and growing in faith. So what do we offer to our children at home and in church? A good dogma, stories of the Bible, apologetics. Say the question that's being asked in the world. Bring the question up and then give them a good answer. For example, they say outside, they can't say that God is 3 and 1. So teach them the answer. They say that God can't be human. Give them the answer. They say that the Bible is old and can't be applied today. Do you have an answer? They say that the Bible is against women and hates women. Do you have an answer? So simply, you know what's being said outside, so get an answer, teach your kids the answer, and have them memorize and convince. We need to make sure our behavior, we have role models, good dialogue, encouragement, and discipline with our kids. You as a role model, are you in a deep relationship with God? Do you have a real relationship with Him? Are you gold or are you straw? He gave us these 6 degrees in the initial passage that help us to understand. We have to know that we are not ignorant of Satan's devices. He wants all of our kids with him. Do we accept that? Do we accept that our kids, the most precious things in our life, would be in Hades, and we're participating in this? This is His will, or do we not see that? We know the will of God, and we know the will of Satan. So be wary. He's the father of all liars. And he knows how to convince the world with his lies. And many times he stole people from the church. Will we allow him to steal people and our children? Focus, pay attention, be vigilant, be watchful. And it's easy for us to blame the church and say the church should and the church should. What about the home? And at the time of the persecution, when the churches were closed, why were there saints who were growing? Because the home was doing its job. And each home was a Sunday school, and each home was a hymns lesson, and each home was teaching theology and dogma, because the home is responsible. In Timothy it says, in humility correcting those who are in opposition. The kids are not the problem, we are the problem. Wake up, be vigilant, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We're too busy with politics and arguing who's going to be president. May God have mercy on us, and glory be to God forever. Amen. That was heavy, huh?
لا بيتكلم بصراحة احنا عاوزين